became apparent to me, not directly in the book, but as an outgrowth of some of my research, is that even though the NFL had been relatively, not perfectly successful, but relatively successful in creating head coaching and general manager opportunities for African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, and even now coming up through the ranks, some women as well, that the top colleges were way behind. And that you had about 50% of the players in the BCS schools, the top college football programs, are African American. And this year, I think 9 or 10% of the head coaches are African American, and that's the highest it's ever been, which I thought was appalling. And when you look at why that's happened, the answer that came to me right away is the presence of the Rooney Rule.
Well, the Rooney Rule was instituted several years back, named after Dan Rooney, the founder and president of the Pittsburgh Steelers. At that time, it was felt in the NFL that there were not enough minority candidates. Well, there were not enough minority head coaches or even assistant coaches. And the result was that a number of NFL coaches, the Tony Dungy's, etc., got an opportunity to coach in the NFL.
I've been involved with football since I've been 9, so it's quite a blessing for me to still be involved in a sport that I've been doing since I was a little boy. So all going through the high school ranks as a player, on to college at University of Massachusetts, and then getting into coaching all started with me getting a master's in education. And from that point, I got bit by the coaching bug. It was systemic. It just kind of continued to grow. My career continued to grow. I started off at Central Connecticut State. From Central Connecticut State, I ended up at Fordham University. From Fordham to Hofstra University. From Hofstra back to Fordham to Wagner College, then UMass, and then back to Wagner.
The Rooney Rule is basically an agreement, between the pro teams, and it was made with an advocacy group that whenever there's an opening for a head coach or for a general manager, you have to interview at least one non-white applicant for it. And not surprisingly, when you look for diversity, you find diversity. Then you find these talented people. So then you find the Ozzie Newsomes, the Jerry Reeses, the Martin Mayhews. And in the college level, there's nothing akin to the Rooney Rule. And so whereas some years with 32 NFL teams, you've had more African-American head coaches than you've had among the 100 top college football programs.
Well, any rule that goes through the NCAA would first have to be set up by the executive committee of the NCAA. Then there would have to be a polling of the coaches. But for any rule change to take place, you really have to talk to college presidents.
The NFL, being that it's only 32 teams, and the media markets and all of those teams, they get a lot of media attention. And the fan base is of that media market, so to speak. Whereas, and I think that Rooney Rule helps to give African American or black coaches exposure or opportunities to interview. Though that opportunity to interview may not qualify them for the job, but it helps to get the interview experience. Whereas in the NCAA versus the NFL, you're talking 32 teams. And NCAA, you're talking roughly 600 teams who play college football. So I think it's much harder to put a governing policy over 600 teams that play football, and that all 600 teams are not in major media markets. When you think about college, much of the head coaches in the college in NCAA are representation of all of the alum, the community, and in some cases, i.e. Idaho University or Boise State, I'm not sure that the minority population is very high.
College football programs, the top programs, they get some of their money, from TV rights, from going to bowl games, or that if they're that successful. They get some of it through the athletic department budget, but at top colleges in football, a lot of the funding comes from foundations that are set up. And then you have your donor base, and some of them can be very, very lavish donors. And if they're giving tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases, they feel like they should have something approaching veto power or certainly an outsized influence over hiring issues. So a really vivid recent example is last year when the University of Texas hired Charlie Strong to be their head coach. It would be their first African American head coach. One of their top boosters, someone who has given so much money to the athletic department that his statue is outside the stadium, came out with the statement that Charlie Strong would be okay as a position coach, that is to say an assistant coach, but didn't have the chops to be a head coach, even though Charlie Strong had had a tremendously successful record at Louisville. So I think that's a really good example of the power, a big booster can have. If you feel like someone might not donate money or might not donate as much, if you hire someone who they disapprove of, someone who's outside of the old boy network, you might be reluctant to do it.
The successes of Charlie Strong or James Franklin and many others, Turner Gill, I think they all set a precedence for young men such as myself who follow after.
Charlie Strong has a very good contract, but I don't know how long of a leash he's going to have there, especially in a place like Texas.
If they don't do well, I think there'll be, unfortunately, a lot of naysayers who will very quickly say, you see, the black coach wasn't really qualified.
I think that everybody should have the opportunity to be interviewed. And I think that's where legislation like the Rooney Rule is important, both on a college level and on a professional level. But what wins the day is who's the best candidate, regardless of who they are. Because if you hire people just to fill a quota, if you would, and then they're not quality people. Like Terry Fuel is a very good job as a defensive coordinator for the Giants. He's had opportunities. Other teams have just found other candidates who they feel are more deserving. But it's not like Terry Fuel is out of the game. He's well paid and he's well respected.
I don't think that it's just some coincidence that the NFL year in and year out has a much higher percentage of African American head coaches and GMs than you have head coaches or athletic directors at the BCS schools. Even in years when there's been some concern in the NFL that the number of black or Latino head coaches has dipped down lower than it's been in the past, as a percentage, it's still invariably higher than the NCAA. And the reason is simple, the Rooney Rule. There's a structure in place that compels NFL franchises to give serious consideration to African American, Latino, Asian American female candidates for these positions. There's nothing that compels the BCS colleges to do it.
So I've had a few head coaching opportunities, and in those opportunities, I have not gone any further than a phone interview. However, those opportunities have presented itself, and although the timing may not have worked out, I'm still in high hopes. I'm still in high hopes to someday be a head coach.